Niccolo Machiavelli. You hear the name and what comes to mind? Evil? Deception? Some guy wringing his hands in the shadows, plotting to overthrow a kingdom? That's the reputation, but it's wrong. Here's the reality. Machiavelli wasn't a villain. He was a realist, a diplomat in Renaissance Florence. And let me tell you, Florence back then wasn't just art and poetry. It was a shark tank. It was pure chaos, betrayal, war, families slaughtering each other for scraps of power. Machiavelli was right in the middle of it. He wasn't a prince himself. He was the guy standing next to the throne, watching, taking notes. He saw powerful men rise, and he watched them crash and burn. And he noticed a pattern. The ones who fell, they usually fell because they were trying to be good. They were playing by rules that nobody else was following. So he wrote The Prince. And this book, it wasn't a guide on how to be a monster. It was a survival manual. Machiavelli argues that the world doesn't care about your intentions. It cares about results. He looked around and realized that if you act like a saint in a world full of wolves, you don't get a halo, you get eaten. He strips away the fantasy. You know, the fantasy that says if you're nice to people, they'll be nice back. Machiavelli points out that's a lie. He warns that human nature is messy. People are fickle, ungrateful, greedy.
You might not like hearing that. It sounds cynical, but Machiavelli would say your feelings don't change the facts. He's not telling you to be cruel for the fun of it. He's telling you to stop being naive, to see the game for what it is. Because unless you understand the brutal truth of who people actually are, you're just a victim in waiting.
Here's something most people don't want to hear, and that's exactly why it needs to be said. You think you're being nice. You think you're being the bigger person. You avoid conflict. You say yes when you mean no. You let people cross your boundaries because, what? You don't want to make things awkward? You want everyone to like you? Machiavelli would look at that and call it exactly what it is: weakness disguised as virtue. See, there's a critical distinction that Machiavelli draws, and most people miss it entirely. There's a difference between being good and being weak. A good person chooses kindness from a position of strength. A weak person is kind because they're terrified of what happens if they're not. That's not kindness. That's survival. That's fear wearing a mask. And Machiavelli saw right through it centuries ago. He argues that people who brand themselves as nice are often just people who lack the courage to assert themselves. They don't hold back out of compassion. They hold back out of cowardice. And the worst part? They convince themselves it's a moral choice. They tell themselves, I'm just not that kind of person. But really, they're just not brave enough to be that kind of person. That's a brutal read, but Machiavelli wasn't in the business of making people comfortable. He was in the business of making people see clearly. He points out something that cuts deep. The world doesn't reward niceness. It just doesn't. You can be the most agreeable, accommodating person in the room and still get passed over, still get used, still get discarded. Because niceness without power is just availability. You become convenient, not respected. And there's a massive difference between those two things. Think about it. How many times have you bent over backward for someone only to watch them take it for granted? How many times have you stayed quiet to keep the peace and ended up at war with yourself? That's not a strategy. That's self-destruction on autopilot. Machiavelli warns that when you make yourself endlessly accommodating, you don't earn loyalty, you earn contempt. People don't look at the person who always says yes and think, wow, what a great human being. They think, good, I can use this person. And they do, over and over again. Now, does this mean Machiavelli is telling you to become cruel, cold, manipulative? No, that's the lazy reading of his work. What he's actually saying is far more nuanced. He's saying, stop confusing submission with virtue. Stop mistaking your inability to stand up for yourself as some kind of moral high ground. It's not. It's a deficit. And until you recognize it as one, nothing changes. He argues that real strength, real goodness even, comes from the ability to be dangerous but controlled, to have the capacity to push back, but to choose when and how. That's power. That's strategy. The nice guy has no such choice. He's not choosing peace. He's defaulting to it because he doesn't know how to do anything else. And that default, Machiavelli would say it's the most dangerous position you can be in, because people who can't protect their own interests will always be at the mercy of those who can. So before you go any further, ask yourself one honest question. Are you actually nice, or are you just afraid? Machiavelli already knows the answer. The question is whether you're willing to face it. Here's probably the most famous thing Machiavelli ever wrote, and most people get it wrong. He asks a simple question: is it better to be loved or feared? And his answer? It's better to be feared, but not hated. That distinction matters a lot, and most people just skip right over it. See, Machiavelli argues that in an ideal world, you'd have both, love and fear, working together. He's not stupid. He knows that combination is the ultimate position of power. But he also says that's almost impossible to pull off. You rarely get both. So when you're forced to choose, and life will force you to choose, fear is the safer bet. Why? Because Machiavelli had zero illusions about human nature. He points out that people are by nature fickle. They're ungrateful, they're greedy, and when things are going well, they love you. They'll promise you everything, their loyalty, their support, their blood even. But the moment things get hard, the moment there's real danger, real cost, they vanish. He warns that love is held together by a chain of obligation, and people will break that chain the second it benefits them. Fear, on the other hand, fear is held together by the dread of punishment, and that dread, it never fades. It doesn't depend on someone's mood. It doesn't depend on what you did for them last week. It's constant. That's the cold math Machiavelli is doing here. He's not saying fear is good. He's saying it's reliable. Love is a beautiful thing, but it's fragile. It's conditional. And if you're building your power on something that conditional, you're building on sand. Now, think about this in everyday life. The nice guy who does everything for everyone, who bends over backward to be liked. What happens? People take advantage. They don't respect boundaries because there are none. There's no consequence for crossing them. Machiavelli would look at that and say, of course, you gave them love without any reason to respect you. You made yourself easy to discard. But here's where people misread him. He's very specific about this. He says, a leader must avoid being hated. That's the line. Fear keeps people in check. Hatred makes them desperate. And desperate people, they've got nothing to lose. He argues that cruelty without purpose, cruelty that's excessive, that's what breeds hatred. And hatred is more dangerous than anything. So what he's really advocating isn't tyranny, it's discipline, it's boundaries. It's the willingness to be uncomfortable, to not be everyone's favorite person, because you know that respect lasts longer than affection. He points out that people will betray someone they love far more easily than someone they fear, and that's not a cynical fantasy. That's just history, over and over again. And look, this doesn't mean you walk around being cold to everyone. That's a child's reading of Machiavelli. What he's actually saying is, don't build your entire strategy on being liked. Don't let the need for approval become your weakness.
Because the moment you need people to love you in order to lead, you've already handed them the power. Fear, the right kind, the measured kind, keeps order. It keeps people honest. Not because they want to be, but because they know what happens if they're not. That's not cruelty, that's clarity. And Machiavelli would argue, most people can't tell the difference. This one's going to sting, but it needs to be said. Most people grow up believing that if you're kind enough, generous enough, good enough, people will treat you the same way. It's a beautiful idea, and Machiavelli would say it's dangerously wrong. He doesn't argue that kindness itself is bad. Let's get that straight. What he argues is that kindness without calculation, kindness given freely, without thought, without boundaries, becomes a weapon that others use against you, not for you, against you. And here's why. Machiavelli observes that when you're consistently generous, people don't become more grateful over time. They become more expectant. They start to feel entitled. What was once a gift becomes an obligation. What was once, wow, thank you, becomes, well, that's the least you could do. He saw this play out in courts, in politics, in leadership, and it plays out in everyday life too, every single day. He points out something brutal in the Prince. A leader who is too generous will eventually exhaust his resources trying to maintain that reputation. And when the resources run out, when he can no longer give, people don't say, oh well, he was generous while it lasted. No, they turn on him, they resent him, because now he's failing to meet the standard he set. The very kindness that was supposed to win their love becomes the reason they despise him. That's the trap. And the nice guy falls into it constantly. Think about it. The person who always says yes. The person who never pushes back. The person who gives and gives and gives. Their time, their energy, their money, their attention, hoping it'll be reciprocated. What actually happens? People take more. They ask for more. And the moment that person finally says no, just once, they're the villain. Suddenly, they're selfish. Suddenly, they're the bad guy. Machiavelli warned about exactly this dynamic centuries ago. He argues that it's actually better to start with a reputation for being, let's call it careful, even stingy. Because when you do give, when you choose to be generous, it means something. It has weight. People notice it. They appreciate it. But when you give everything away from the start, there's nothing left to impress them with. There's no leverage. There's no surprise. You've already played every card in your hand, and you played them for free. And here's the part people really don't want to hear. Machiavelli warns that there will always be people, always, who see your kindness and think one thing: opportunity. Not, what a wonderful person. Not, I should match their energy. Just, how can I use this? That's not everyone, sure, but it's enough people to matter. And if you're walking around with no defenses, no discernment, no filter for who deserves your generosity and who's just milking it, you're going to get burned, repeatedly. So what's the alternative? Machiavelli doesn't say become heartless. He says become strategic. Know when to give and when to hold back. Know who's worth your generosity and who's just taking advantage. Stop treating kindness like a blanket policy and start treating it like a resource, because that's what it is, a finite one. The nice guy treats kindness like it's his identity. Like if he stops being generous, he stops being him. But Machiavelli would argue that's not virtue, that's dependency. That's someone who doesn't know any other way to get people to stay. And that kind of kindness, it's not strength, it's a leash, and you're the one wearing it.
You ever notice how the nicest person in the room is usually the one getting the worst deal? They're the one staying late. They're the one saying yes when they mean no. They're the one bending over backwards for people who wouldn't even bend a finger for them. And here's the thing, they think it's a virtue. They think being endlessly accommodating, endlessly agreeable, endlessly nice is somehow going to be rewarded. That one day people will see their goodness and return the favor. Machiavelli would say that's delusional. See, Machiavelli understood something that most people refuse to accept. He argues that the world does not operate on fairness. It operates on power. And when you make yourself infinitely available, infinitely agreeable, infinitely easy to deal with, you don't earn respect. You earn a label. You become convenient, a doormat, something people step on without even thinking about it. And it's not because they're evil. That's the part people miss. It's because you've trained them to treat you that way. Machiavelli points out that people will naturally take as much as they're allowed to take. That's not cruelty. That's just human nature. If you set no limits, people won't set them for you. They'll just keep pushing, keep asking, keep taking. Not out of malice, out of habit, because you made it easy. So the nice guy who never says no, he's not being kind, he's being weak. And Machiavelli draws a very sharp line between the two. Kindness is a choice made from a position of strength. Weakness is when you can't say no, even when you want to. When you swallow your own needs just to keep the peace. When you abandon your own boundaries because you're terrified of conflict. That's not generosity. That's fear wearing a mask. And Machiavelli warns that fear has a cost. Because the more you give without limits, the less people value what you give. Think about it. When something is always available, always free, always guaranteed, what happens to its worth? It drops to zero. You become background noise, invisible, taken for granted. He argues that respect is never given freely. It's claimed, it's established through boundaries, through the willingness to say no and actually mean it, through showing people that your time, your energy, your presence has a price. Not in a transactional, manipulative way, but in a way that signals, I know what I'm worth, and I won't let you forget it. But the nice guy doesn't do that. The nice guy is so busy being liked that he forgets to be respected. And Machiavelli makes it painfully clear. If you ever have to choose between being liked and being respected, choose respect every single time. Because people who like you will still walk all over you, but people who respect you, they think twice. So here's what Machiavelli is really saying. Stop confusing submission with virtue. Stop thinking that being easy to deal with makes you a good person. It doesn't. It makes you an easy target. And the brutal truth? People don't walk over you because they're bad. They walk over you because you lay down. You position yourself flat on the ground, and then you get upset when someone treats you like the floor. Machiavelli's advice is simple. Stand up, set the line, and stop apologizing for having one. Here's where Machiavelli starts. And honestly, it's where most people stop listening, because what he says right out of the gate is uncomfortable. Machiavelli argues that the single biggest mistake anyone can make in leadership, in life, in anything, is to confuse the world as it should be with the world as it actually is. And that gap between how things ought to work and how they really work, he calls that the space where good people get destroyed. Think about that for a second. He's not saying the world is hopeless. He's not saying don't have ideals. What he's saying is, if you build your entire strategy around how people should behave, you're building on sand, and you will sink. See, Machiavelli watched it happen over and over. He was a diplomat in Renaissance Florence. He sat across the table from popes, kings, warlords. He saw brilliant, moral, well-meaning leaders get crushed, not because they lacked virtue, but because they assumed everyone else had it too. That's the trap. That's what he warns against. He puts it bluntly in The Prince. He says, a man who wants to act virtuously in every way will inevitably be ruined among so many who are not virtuous. Not might be ruined, will be ruined. That's not pessimism. That's observation. That's data collected from watching the real world operate without a filter. And this is the part that bothers people, because we're raised on a different story, right? Work hard, be kind, play fair, and good things will come to you. Machiavelli doesn't buy it. Not because he's against kindness or fairness, but because he recognizes that relying on those things as a strategy is reckless. It leaves you wide open. He points out that the nice guy, the one who always gives, always trusts, always assumes the best, isn't noble. He's exposed. He's a target. Not because the world is full of monsters, but because it only takes one person who doesn't play by the same rules to take everything from you. And that's the reality gap he's talking about. Most people operate with a mental model of the world that's aspirational. They think, if I'm fair to people, they'll be fair to me. Machiavelli says, no, some will, many won't. And the ones who won't, they're counting on you being the nice one. They're banking on your predictability, your softness, your unwillingness to see them for what they are. So what does he suggest? He doesn't say, become ruthless. He doesn't say, abandon your values. What Machiavelli argues is something far more nuanced. He says, start with reality. Start with what is. Understand people as they actually behave, not as you wish they would. And then make your decisions. It's the difference between being a good person who understands the game and a good person who doesn't even know a game is being played. And that second one, that's the nice guy. The one who keeps getting blindsided, keeps getting passed over, keeps wondering why the world doesn't reward his goodness the way it's supposed to. Machiavelli's answer is simple, brutal, but simple. It doesn't. Not automatically, not reliably, not without strategy behind it. He's not telling you to stop being good. He's telling you to stop being naive. There's a massive difference. And understanding that difference, really letting it sink in, that's the first step out of the reality gap. That's where everything else he teaches begins. Now, here's one that's gonna sting a little, because we've all been taught since we were kids that your word is your bond. You make a promise, you keep it, no matter what. That's what good people do, right? Machiavelli says, not so fast. He argues pretty bluntly that a leader who always keeps his word, no matter the cost, is setting himself up for destruction, and not just any kind of destruction. The kind where you see it coming, you could have avoided it, but you didn't, because you were too busy being honorable. Let that sit for a second. He's not saying go around lying to everyone. That's not the point. What he's saying is this: the world changes, circumstances shift, and a promise you made under one set of conditions, it might become a death sentence under a different set of conditions. Sticking to it blindly just to feel good about yourself, that's not integrity. Machiavelli would call that stupidity. He points out that history is full of men who kept every single promise and lost everything. And it's also full of men who knew when to adapt, when to pivot, when to quietly step back from a commitment that no longer served them. And those men, they survived. They thrived. See, here's the thing most people don't want to hear. Machiavelli argues that the people you're keeping your word to, they won't always keep theirs. And that's not a maybe. That's a pattern. He warns that if you operate with total honesty in a world full of people who don't, you're not noble, you're a target. He uses this powerful image, the fox and the lion. A leader, he says, needs to be both. The lion fights with brute strength, but the fox recognizes traps. And sometimes recognizing the trap means understanding that a promise someone extracted from you was the trap itself. That's the part people miss. The commitment you feel so proud of honoring, someone might have designed it specifically to pin you down. So, what does Machiavelli actually suggest? He argues that a smart leader should appear to be a man of his word, always. People need to believe you're trustworthy. That perception matters more than you think. But behind closed doors, you need the flexibility to break a promise when keeping it would ruin you, not out of malice, out of survival. And yeah, that sounds cold, it sounds manipulative, but Machiavelli doesn't care about how it sounds. He cares about what works. He's writing for people who want to navigate the real world, not live inside a fairy tale. He also makes a really sharp observation here. He says that people in general are so caught up in what's right in front of them that they'll judge you by your results, not your methods. Win, and nobody's going to audit your integrity. Lose, and all the honesty in the world won't save your reputation. That's the brutal math of it. And look, you don't have to agree with him. A lot of people don't. But you'd be foolish to ignore the logic behind it, because we've all been in situations where we kept a promise out of guilt, out of obligation, out of some deep need to be seen as the good guy. And it cost us. It cost us time, energy, opportunities, sometimes relationships. Machiavelli's not telling you to become a liar. He's telling you to stop being a prisoner of your own word. There's a difference, a big one. Your word should be a tool you use wisely, not a chain someone else wraps around your neck. That's his argument, and honestly, it's pretty hard to punch a hole in it. Most people grow up being told to trust others, give people the benefit of the doubt, assume good intentions. And look, that sounds wonderful. It really does. But Machiavelli would say that kind of thinking is exactly what gets you destroyed. He doesn't sugarcoat it. Machiavelli argues that men are, by nature, unreliable. He says they'll love you when things are easy. They'll promise you the world when they need nothing from you. But the moment things get hard, the moment it costs them something to stand by you, they vanish, every single time. And that's not him being bitter. That's him reporting what he saw, over and over again. Allies turning on leaders the second the tide shifted. Friends becoming enemies overnight. Not because they were inherently evil people, but because self-interest is the most powerful force in human behavior. Machiavelli points out that people will break every bond, loyalty, friendship, even blood, if their survival or comfort is at stake. So, what does this mean for you? It means stop handing out trust like it's free. Machiavelli warns that blind trust is not a virtue, it's a vulnerability. And there's a huge difference between being open to people and being wide open for people to walk all over you. Think about it. How many times have you trusted someone, really trusted them, and they let you down? Not because they're terrible humans, but because when push came to shove, they chose themselves. That's not a betrayal in Machiavelli's eyes. That's just human nature doing what it does. He argues that a wise person should never depend entirely on the promises of others. Words are cheap. People say what they need to say in the moment. I've got your back. You can count on me. I'll never do that to you. Machiavelli would tell you to smile, nod, and verify. Always verify. And here's where people get it twisted. They hear this and think, so I should just be paranoid? Trust nobody? Live like everyone's out to get me? No, that's not what he's saying. Machiavelli's point is more precise than that. He's saying, don't be so desperate to believe in people that you ignore the warning signs. Don't let your need to see the good in someone blind you to who they actually are. He warns against confusing someone's words with their character. Watch what people do, not what they say, because actions don't lie. A person can tell you they respect you while undermining you behind your back. And if you're too trusting, you won't even see it coming. You'll be the last one to know. Machiavelli argues that the smartest leaders, the ones who lasted, were the ones who kept a layer of distance. They were warm enough to earn loyalty, but sharp enough to never be caught off guard. They trusted people to a point, and that point was always calibrated by observation, by evidence, not by hope. That's the distinction. Hope is not a strategy. Machiavelli makes that painfully clear. You can hope people will do the right thing. You can hope your partner, your friend, your business associate will keep their word. But hope without caution, that's just gambling with your life. So no, he's not telling you to become cold. He's not telling you to shut everyone out. He's telling you to be strategic about who gets access to you, to earn trust slowly, to give it even slower, and to always keep your eyes open. Because the people who get burned the worst, they're never the cautious ones. They're the ones who trusted too much, too fast, with too little proof. One of Machiavelli's most famous ideas, and honestly one of his most brilliant, is the metaphor of the lion and the fox. He puts it simply, a leader must be both, not one or the other, both. The lion is strong, intimidating, it can fight off wolves, but the lion, it can't see the traps, it walks right into them. Pure force without awareness is just recklessness with muscles. The fox is clever. It sees the traps a mile away. It maneuvers, it adapts, it outsmarts. But the fox, it can't fight off the wolves. Pure cunning without strength is just intelligence waiting to get crushed. Machiavelli argues that you need both natures living inside you, the strength to act decisively when the moment demands it, and the intelligence to know when force is the wrong move entirely. And here's where most people get it wrong. Most nice guys, they're neither the lion nor the fox. They're the lamb. They don't fight, they don't strategize, they just hope things work out. They hope people will be fair, they hope their good intentions will be enough. And Machiavelli would say that hope, without strategy, is just a slow way of losing. But then you've got the other extreme. People who think being tough is enough. They bulldoze through every situation. They think aggression equals power. They roar at everything. And sure, that works. For a while, until someone smarter sets a trap they never see coming, and down they go. Machiavelli warns against both extremes. He's not saying be aggressive. He's not saying be sneaky. He's saying be adaptive. Read the room. Know when the situation calls for strength and when it calls for subtlety. That's not manipulation. That's awareness. That's intelligence applied to real life. And this is where it gets practical. He points out that in any conflict, whether it's a negotiation, a workplace rivalry, or even a personal relationship, the person who wins isn't always the strongest or the smartest. It's the one who knows which tool to use and when. Sometimes you need to stand your ground and make it crystal clear that you will not be moved. That's the lion. Sometimes you need to smile, stay quiet, and let the other person think they're winning, while you position yourself 3 moves ahead. That's the fox. The key, Machiavelli argues, is fluidity. Rigidity kills. The person who only knows one mode, who only knows how to fight or only knows how to scheme, is predictable, and predictable people are easy to defeat. So what does this mean for the so-called nice guy?
It means stop operating from a single gear. Stop thinking that being agreeable is a personality. It's not. It's a limitation. Machiavelli is essentially saying develop range. Learn when to bare your teeth and when to move in silence. Learn when to confront and when to let things play out. Not because you're weak, but because you're smart enough to know that every situation requires a different version of you. And that's not being fake, that's being effective. He makes it clear, the people who thrive aren't the ones who are always kind or always ruthless. They're the ones who can be either, depending on what the moment requires. That flexibility, that's the real power. The lion gets respect, the fox gets results, but the person who can be both, Machiavelli says that person gets everything.
Machiavelli understood something that most people learn way too late. Transparency is not always a virtue. In fact, he argues it can be one of the fastest ways to lose everything you've built. And yeah, that goes against everything we're told growing up. Be open, be honest, wear your heart on your sleeve, share your plans, tell people what you're thinking. But Machiavelli, he warns that the moment you reveal everything, your intentions, your strategies, your true feelings, you've given other people the blueprint to defeat you.
Think about that for a second. Every time you tell someone exactly what you want, you've told them exactly what to use against you. Every time you lay out your full plan, you've given them time to prepare, to counter, to undermine. He argues that information is power, and giving it away freely, that's not honesty, that's carelessness. Now, he's not saying you should lie about everything. That's a lazy interpretation. What Machiavelli is really saying is be selective, be strategic about what you reveal and when you reveal it. There's a massive difference between being dishonest and being discreet, and most people don't understand that difference. He points out that the wisest leaders throughout history were the ones who kept people guessing, not because they were paranoid, but because unpredictability is a form of protection. When no one knows your next move, no one can block it. When people can't read you, they can't manipulate you. It's that simple. And this applies everywhere, not just politics, not just war, everyday life. The colleague who tells everyone about their big career move before it's secured, they've just invited jealousy, sabotage, or competition they didn't need. The person in a negotiation who reveals their bottom line up front, they've already lost. Machiavelli would say you handed them your leverage. Why would you do that? He argues that silence is a weapon, a strategic pause, the ability to just not react, not share, not explain themselves. Most people can't do it. They feel this compulsive need to fill the silence, to prove themselves, to show they've got nothing to hide. But Machiavelli warns that this impulse, this need to be seen as open and transparent, is actually a weakness disguised as a strength. And here's the part that really stings. He points out that the people you share everything with, they don't always have your best interests at heart. Not because they're evil, but because they're human. They've got their own agendas, their own ambitions, their own insecurities. And the information you hand them today can become the ammunition they use tomorrow. Maybe not on purpose. Maybe they just let something slip. But the damage is done either way. So what does Machiavelli actually recommend? Control the flow. Share what serves you. Hold back what doesn't. Let people see what you want them to see, and nothing more. That's not manipulation. That's self-preservation. The nice guy tells everyone everything because he thinks openness builds trust. And sometimes it does. But Machiavelli would argue that trust built on full exposure is trust that makes you vulnerable. Real trust is earned slowly, carefully, and it never requires you to empty your hand on the table just to prove you're playing fair. keep something back, always. Not because you're scheming, not because you're deceitful, but because Machiavelli warns, the world doesn't reward the person who gives everything away. It rewards the person who knows what to hold on to and when to let go. Here's something Machiavelli understood that most people completely overlook. It doesn't matter who you actually are. What matters is who people think you are. Harsh? Maybe. But he argues that perception is everything. And in the real world, not the idealistic one we wish we lived in, your reputation will either protect you or destroy you. There is no middle ground. Machiavelli makes this point very clearly in The Prince. He says a leader must be deeply concerned with how he appears. Not in a vain way, not in a look-at-me way, but in a strategic way. Because people don't judge you based on your intentions. They judge you based on what they see, what they hear, what they believe about you. And once that belief is formed, it's almost impossible to change. So if people believe you're weak, it doesn't matter how strong you actually are. They'll treat you like you're weak. They'll test you. They'll challenge you. They'll take shots they never would have taken if your reputation said otherwise. But if people believe you're someone of substance, someone with power, someone not to be trifled with, they'll think twice, even if they've never seen you prove it. That's the power of reputation. It fights battles you never have to. And this is where the nice guy gets absolutely crushed. See, the nice guy doesn't think about reputation. He thinks about being authentic, being real, being himself. And look, there's nothing wrong with authenticity, but Machiavelli would argue that authenticity without awareness is reckless, because while you're busy just being yourself, other people are crafting narratives about you. They're telling others who you are. They're defining you. And if you're not actively shaping that story, someone else will shape it for you, and you probably won't like what they come up with. Machiavelli warns that a reputation once lost is almost impossible to rebuild. That's the thing people don't realize. You can spend years building trust, building credibility, building a name, and one bad move, one moment of weakness, one lapse in judgment, and it's gone, just like that. He saw it happen to princes and rulers, men who had everything, power, wealth, influence, and they lost it all. Not because they lost a war, but because they lost their reputation first. The war just came after. So what does he suggest? Guard it, actively, intentionally. Machiavelli argues that you should control the narrative before the narrative controls you. That means being deliberate about what you say, what you do, and more importantly, what you allow others to say and do about you. It means not letting slights go unanswered, not because you're petty, but because silence is interpreted as weakness, and weakness invites aggression. He also points out that reputation isn't just about defense, it's about opportunity. People want to align themselves with someone who has a strong reputation. They want to work with them, follow them, support them. A solid reputation opens doors you didn't even know existed. But a damaged one? It closes doors you didn't even know were shutting. And here's the kicker. Machiavelli argues that sometimes you need to appear to have qualities you may not fully possess. Mercy, honesty, piety. Not because you should be fake, but because the appearance of these virtues can be just as powerful as the virtues themselves. It's not about deception. It's about presentation. It's about understanding that people respond to what they perceive, not what's underneath. Your reputation is not a luxury, it's armor. And walking through life without it, that's not bravery. That's just asking to get hurt. Here's something most people never think about. The more predictable you are,
the easier you are to control. And Machiavelli, he understood this better than anyone. He argues that predictability is one of the most dangerous traits a person can have, not because being consistent is bad, but because when people know exactly what you're going to do before you even do it, you lose all your leverage, all of it. Think about the person who always says yes. Everyone around them already knows the answer before they ask. So what happens? People stop asking genuinely. They start expecting, then demanding, because your yes isn't a decision anymore. It's a guarantee. And guarantees don't get appreciated. They get exploited.
Machiavelli warns that when you become completely readable, when your reactions, your emotions, your decisions follow the same pattern every single time, you hand people a blueprint, a manual, a step-by-step guide on exactly how to handle you, how to push your buttons, how to get what they want from you without giving anything back. And they will use it, not because they sat down and planned it, but because humans are naturally wired to find the path of least resistance. You being predictable, that's the easiest path there is. Now, Machiavelli isn't saying you should be chaotic. He's not saying go out there and be erratic just for the sake of it. That's not strategy. That's insanity. What he is saying is this: keep something in reserve. Don't show every card. Don't react the same way every time. Don't let people build a complete map of who you are and how you operate. He points out that the most powerful figures in history were the ones people could never quite figure out. There was always an element of uncertainty around them. You didn't know if they'd reward you or ignore you, if they'd agree or push back. And that uncertainty, it created respect. It created caution. People paid attention. People chose their words carefully because they couldn't just assume. But the nice guy, the people pleaser, he's an open book. No, worse. He's an open book with the answers highlighted. You know he'll forgive you. You know he'll come back. You know he'll let it slide. So where's the incentive to treat him well? There isn't one. Because there's no risk, no consequence, no surprise. Machiavelli argues that a degree of unpredictability is essential, not to confuse people, but to keep them honest. When someone isn't sure how you'll respond, they treat you differently. They respect your space. They measure their actions, because they can't just run the same play on you over and over and expect the same result. And this applies everywhere: relationships, work, friendships, negotiations. The moment you become a sure thing, you become a cheap thing. So what does Machiavelli suggest? Simple. Break the pattern. Not every time. That becomes its own pattern, but enough to keep people from getting too comfortable. Say no when they expect yes. Walk away when they expect you to stay. Be quiet when they expect you to explain yourself. You don't owe anyone a roadmap to your behavior. You don't owe anyone the comfort of knowing exactly what you'll do next. That's not deception. That's self-preservation. Machiavelli makes the point clearly. The person who can be fully predicted can be fully managed, and a person who can be fully managed, they're not in control of their own life. Someone else is. Now, this is probably the most misquoted, most misunderstood thing Machiavelli ever said. The end justifies the means. People throw it around like it's a blank check to do whatever you want, like Machiavelli was giving permission to lie, cheat, and manipulate your way through life. But that's not what he's saying, not even close. What Machiavelli actually argues is this: people don't judge you by your process. They judge you by your results. That's it. That's the core of it. And whether you like it or not, he's right. Think about your own life. Nobody asks how many hours you studied if you failed the exam. Nobody cares how hard you worked on a project that flopped. People see outcomes.
They remember outcomes. They respect outcomes. The effort behind it, that's invisible.
Machiavelli recognized this centuries ago, and it still holds up today. He warns that the world doesn't hand out trophies for good intentions. You can mean well. You can try your hardest. You can follow every rule, check every box, do everything right. And if you don't produce results, none of it matters. Not to the people watching, not to the people judging, and definitely not to the people competing against you. And here's where it gets sharp. Machiavelli points out that people who obsess over doing things the proper way, the nice way, the comfortable way, often end up with nothing to show for it. Meanwhile, the person who was willing to be flexible, who adapted, who made the hard calls, they're the ones standing at the end. They're the ones people follow, not because they were perfect, but because they delivered. Now, does that mean anything goes? Does Machiavelli say, burn it all down as long as you win? No. And this is where most people get him wrong. He's not endorsing cruelty for cruelty's sake. He's not saying morality doesn't matter. What he's saying is far more practical than that. He's saying, be honest with yourself about what actually produces results. Stop clinging to methods that feel good but don't work. Stop choosing comfort over effectiveness. Because at the end of the day, the world doesn't care about your moral resume. It cares about what you built, what you achieved, what you made happen. And this is a tough pill to swallow for the nice guy, because the nice guy has been taught that the how matters more than the what. That as long as you play fair, you can hold your head high, even if you lose. Machiavelli flips that completely. He argues that losing with honor is still losing, and nobody's writing songs about the person who came in second because they were too polite to compete. But here's the nuance people miss. Machiavelli isn't saying abandon ethics. He's saying don't let rigid, performative morality become an excuse for inaction. Don't hide behind, I'm a good person, when what you really mean is, I'm afraid to make the hard choice. And if the answer is that it's not working, Machiavelli says, change it, adapt, evolve, drop what's not serving you, even if it's what everyone else thinks you should be doing. The end doesn't justify evil, but it does demand effectiveness. And that distinction, that's where Machiavelli separates the strategists from the spectators. Let's talk about something that quietly ruins people. And it doesn't look like ruin when it's happening. It actually looks like success. It looks like warmth. It looks like connection. It's the obsession with being liked. Machiavelli tackles this head-on, and he doesn't sugarcoat it. He argues that a leader who prioritizes being liked above all else is a leader who will eventually be controlled by the very people he's trying to please. That's not leadership. That's performance. Think about it. When your number one goal is to make everyone around you comfortable, what are you really doing? You're handing them the remote control to your life. You say yes when you mean no. You soften your stance so nobody gets upset. You avoid hard conversations because, God forbid, someone might not like you after. Machiavelli warns that this is one of the most dangerous traps a person can fall into. Because it feels noble, it feels kind, but underneath it, it's fear. Pure, unfiltered fear of rejection. And people can smell that. Even if they can't name it, they feel it, and they will use it. He makes a distinction that most people gloss over, the difference between being loved and being respected. He argues that in a perfect world, sure, you'd have both. But if you have to choose, respect wins, every time. Because love without respect is just affection. It's warm, it's nice, but it won't hold when things get hard. Respect, on the other hand, respect holds. Respect creates boundaries. Respect keeps people in line. not out of cruelty, but out of order. And here's where Machiavelli gets really sharp. He points out that when you try to please everyone, you end up standing for nothing. You become this shapeless, spineless version of yourself that molds to whoever's in the room. And the irony? People don't actually like that person. They might smile at you, they might invite you around, but deep down, they don't trust you.
Because they can sense you'll say whatever they want to hear, and if you'll do it for them, you'll do it for someone else too. Nobody trusts a people pleaser. Not really. Machiavelli also argues that the desire to be universally liked makes you predictable, and predictable people are easy to manipulate. If someone knows you'll cave the moment they show disapproval, that's all they need. A frown, a cold shoulder, a little bit of silence.
And you'll fold. You'll change your position. You'll compromise things you shouldn't compromise. Not because it's right, but because you can't stand the discomfort of someone being unhappy with you. That's not strength. That's a leash. He warns that the people who actually change the world, the ones who build something lasting, they all had enemies. They all had people who didn't like them, and they were fine with it. Not because they were cruel or heartless, but because they understood something most people don't. You can't move forward and keep everyone happy at the same time. Those two things are almost always in conflict. So, what's the takeaway from Machiavelli's thinking here? Stop chasing approval. Stop running from conflict. Stop bending yourself into shapes that don't fit just so someone will smile at you. It's exhausting. And worse, it's ineffective. Be clear, be fair, be direct. And if someone doesn't like you for it, that's not a failure. Machiavelli would argue that's actually proof you're doing something right, because the moment everybody likes you is usually the moment you've stopped being useful to anyone, including yourself. Now, here's something most people get completely wrong about Machiavelli. They hear the word aggression, and they think he's talking about being loud, being angry, picking fights. No, that's not what he's saying, not even close. Machiavelli draws a very clear line between aggression and controlled aggression, and that difference, it's everything. See, he argues that raw, uncontrolled aggression is actually a weakness. It's reactive, it's emotional. It's the kind of thing that gets people destroyed because they act before they think. And Machiavelli had zero respect for that. He saw it all the time. Leaders who let their temper dictate their next move, and almost every single time, it cost them. But controlled aggression, that's a different animal entirely. Machiavelli points out that the people who win, the ones who actually hold power and keep it, they know when to be aggressive and when to hold back. It's not about being aggressive all the time. It's about being aggressive at the right time. There's a precision to it, a calculation. You don't swing wildly. You wait. You read the situation. And then, when the moment is right, you strike, decisively, without hesitation. And here's the part that makes nice guys uncomfortable. He warns that if you never show your teeth, people will assume you don't have any. That's just how it works. People test boundaries. They probe for weakness. And if all they ever see from you is politeness, accommodation, softness, they will take advantage. Not because they're all bad people, but because that's human nature. Machiavelli understood this deeply. He wasn't guessing. He was observing. So, what does controlled aggression actually look like in practice? It's the ability to say no firmly, without apologizing for it. It's setting a boundary and actually enforcing it. It's walking away from a deal that doesn't serve you, even when everyone around you is pressuring you to stay. It's confrontation when confrontation is necessary, not for the sake of drama, but because silence in that moment would be a surrender. Machiavelli argues that people confuse niceness with safety. They think if they're agreeable enough, if they avoid all conflict, they'll be protected.
But he says the opposite is true. He points out that excessive niceness often invites the very danger you're trying to avoid. Because when you never push back, you train people to push you. And once that dynamic is set, it's incredibly hard to reverse. And look, he's not saying you should walk around intimidating everyone. That's foolish. That's the uncontrolled version. What he is saying is that you need the capacity for aggression. You need people to know, even if it's unspoken, that there's a line, and if they cross it, there will be consequences. He compares it to a ruler who is too gentle with threats to his authority. Machiavelli warns that such a ruler doesn't inspire loyalty. He inspires contempt. Because people don't follow someone they think is weak. They follow someone they respect. And respect, according to Machiavelli, comes from the understanding that this person is capable of force, but chooses restraint. That's the key word, chooses.
Controlled aggression isn't about losing control. It's about having so much control that when you do act aggressively, it hits like a thunderclap. People notice, people remember, and people adjust their behavior accordingly. So the nice guy who never gets angry, never confronts, never fights for what he wants, Machiavelli would say he's not being kind, he's being passive. And passivity, in Machiavelli's world, is just slow surrender.
Here's something most people don't want to hear, but Machiavelli says it anyway. People will betray you. Not might, will. And he doesn't say this to be dramatic. He says it because he watched it happen, over and over again in the courts of Renaissance Italy. Allies flipping sides overnight, trusted advisors selling secrets for a better deal, friends who swore loyalty, gone the moment the wind changed direction. Machiavelli argues that human beings are, at their core, self-interested. He writes, and this is almost word for word, that men are ungrateful, fickle, liars, and deceivers. Now, does that mean every single person you meet is going to stab you in the back? No. But he warns that if you build your entire strategy around the assumption that people will stay loyal to you out of love or friendship or goodwill, you're setting yourself up for destruction.
And that's the part that stings. Because most of us, especially the nice guys, we operate on trust by default. We give people the benefit of the doubt. We assume good intentions. We think, I've been good to them, so they'll be good to me. Machiavelli looks at that and says, that's not strategy, that's hope. And hope is not a plan.
He points out something really uncomfortable. Loyalty based on love, on affection, on kindness, is fragile. It breaks the moment someone's self-interest kicks in. But loyalty based on consequence, on structure, on making it more costly to betray you than to stay loyal, that holds. That actually holds. So what does Machiavelli suggest? He doesn't say become paranoid. He doesn't say trust nobody and live in isolation. That's not the move. What he argues is, you should never be surprised by betrayal. You should always have a contingency, always have a backup, always position yourself so that if someone does flip on you, and someone eventually will, you're not left standing there with nothing. Think about it. How many times have you seen someone pour everything into a business partner, only to get cut out? How many times has someone trusted a friend with sensitive information and watched it spread? How many times has someone given their all to a relationship, only to be discarded when they were no longer useful? Machiavelli saw all of this centuries ago, and his advice is blunt. Plan for it. Not because you're cynical, not because you're cold, but because you're smart. He warns that the people who get destroyed in politics and in life aren't the ones who lacked talent or ambition. They're the ones who trusted the wrong person at the wrong time, and they didn't have a fallback. That's what got them, not the betrayal itself, the lack of preparation for it. And here's what's really brutal about his perspective.
He argues that you can't even fully blame the person who betrays you, because they're just doing what humans do. They're acting in their own interest. The real fault? It lies with you, for not seeing it coming, for not building a structure that accounted for it. That's a hard pill to swallow, but Machiavelli isn't here to make you feel good. He's here to make you effective. So no, he's not telling you to become heartless. He's telling you to stop being reckless with your trust. There's a difference, a big one. And the sooner you understand that difference, the harder you become to break. Here's something that's going to sting a little. Most people walk through life believing that if they just do the right thing, if they play fair, if they stay honest and kind and decent, the universe will somehow reward them, that good things come to good people, that justice has a schedule. Machiavelli looks at that idea and he laughs, not because he's cruel, but because history taught him something different, something uncomfortable. He argues that fortune, luck, opportunity, the turning of events, doesn't care about your morals. It doesn't check your resume for good deeds. It doesn't ask whether you deserved it. Fortune favors the bold, not the righteous. And that distinction, it changes everything. See, Machiavelli watched leaders rise and fall. He studied empires. He saw men who were kind, generous, morally upright, get absolutely crushed. And he saw men who were cunning, decisive, and yes, sometimes ruthless, thrive. Not always, but often enough to notice a pattern. And the pattern was this: the ones who waited for permission, who waited for the right moment, who hesitated because they wanted to be fair, they got left behind every single time. He points out that fortune is like a river. When it's calm, everyone ignores it. Nobody builds walls, nobody prepares. But when it floods, and it always floods, it destroys everything in its path. The people who survive, they're not the ones who prayed for the water to stop. And here's where it gets personal for the nice guy. The nice guy waits. He waits for his boss to notice his hard work. He waits for the promotion to come to him. He waits for people to treat him fairly because he treats them fairly. He's playing a game with rules that nobody else agreed to follow. Machiavelli warns against this. He doesn't say you should become a monster. He doesn't say throw your ethics in the trash, but he makes it painfully clear. Sitting around being good while the world moves around you is not a strategy, it's a surrender. He argues that you have to meet fortune halfway. You've got to move, you've got to act. Sometimes before you're ready, sometimes before it feels comfortable, because the window doesn't stay open. And the people who are willing to jump through it, they don't care if you were standing in line first. That's the brutal truth. Fairness is a concept humans invented. The world didn't sign up for it. And Machiavelli saw this again and again. The leader who hesitated, replaced. The prince who tried to please everyone, overthrown. The general who waited for the honorable moment to strike, defeated. Boldness isn't about being reckless. He's very clear on that. It's about decisiveness. It's about seeing the moment and seizing it without overthinking, without drowning in what-ifs, without asking if you're worthy enough. So no, being a good person doesn't guarantee good outcomes. Machiavelli doesn't say that to be heartless. He says it to wake you up. Because the real tragedy, it's not the bold man who fails. It's the righteous man who never even tried and spent his whole life wondering why the world passed him by. Fortune doesn't owe you anything, but if you're bold enough, Machiavelli suggests, it just might respect you enough to let you ride the wave instead of drowning in it. Most people think staying neutral is the smart move. Don't pick a side, don't ruffle feathers. Play it safe. Stay in the middle where it's comfortable. Machiavelli says that's one of the dumbest things you can do,
and he doesn't mince words about it. He argues, very clearly, that neutrality is not safety, it's a slow death. Because when conflict arises and two sides are going at it, the person who sits on the fence doesn't get praised for their balance. They get destroyed by both sides. Think about it. Machiavelli points out that the winner doesn't need you. You didn't help them when it mattered. You weren't there in the trenches. So why would they reward you now? They won without you. You're irrelevant to them.
And the loser resents you because you could have helped. You could have tipped the scales, but you chose to watch from the sidelines. So now you've got someone with a grudge and nothing left to lose. That's the trap. Machiavelli warns that by trying to offend no one, you end up offending everyone.
Now, here's where this gets real. This isn't just about wars and kingdoms. This plays out every single day, in offices, in friendships, in families. The person who refuses to take a stand, who always says, "I see both sides," who never commits to a position, that person isn't respected. They're tolerated, and there's a massive difference between the two.
Machiavelli understood something most nice guys don't. Indecision is a decision, and it's the worst one you can make. Because at least when you pick a side, you gain an ally, a real one, someone who knows you showed up when it counted. But neutrality buys you nothing. No loyalty, no trust, no leverage. He makes this point repeatedly in The Prince. A leader who tries to avoid conflict by staying neutral doesn't avoid anything. He just delays the consequences. And when those consequences finally arrive, he faces them alone. No allies, no support. Just the cold reality that his safe strategy left him completely exposed. And here's the part that stings. Machiavelli argues that people actually lose respect for you when you stay neutral. Not because you're being diplomatic, but because they read it for what it really is: fear.
You're not staying neutral because you're wise. You're staying neutral because you're afraid of the cost of choosing, and people can smell that every time. So what does Machiavelli suggest instead? Commit. Pick the side you believe gives you the best strategic advantage and go all in. He doesn't say be reckless. He doesn't say pick fights for no reason, but he's very clear. When the moment demands a choice, make one. A wrong decision, he implies, is still better than no decision, because at least a wrong decision can be corrected. Indecision just rots. This is brutal to hear if you're someone who's spent your whole life avoiding confrontation, staying quiet, keeping the peace. But Machiavelli's not interested in your comfort. He's interested in your survival. And he warns, the world doesn't reward the neutral. It forgets them. Or worse, it punishes them. Because in a world where everyone is fighting for something, the person who fights for nothing becomes a target for everyone. Neutrality feels safe. Machiavelli says it's the most dangerous position of all, and honestly, history keeps proving him right. Here's something most people don't want to hear. The person smiling at you right now might be the same person working against you behind closed doors. And Machiavelli, he wouldn't even flinch at that, because he saw it everywhere, in courts, in politics, in friendships, in alliances that looked unbreakable until they broke. Machiavelli argues that people are, by nature, performers. Every single one of us. We put on faces depending on who we're talking to, what we want, and what's at stake. And he doesn't say this to be cruel. He says it because ignoring it is what gets people destroyed. Think about it. How many times have you trusted someone's words, only to be blindsided by their actions? That gap between what people say and what they actually do, that's the mask. And Machiavelli points out that the most dangerous people in any room aren't the ones who are openly hostile. No,
It's the ones who seem the friendliest, the ones who agree with everything you say, the ones who never challenge you. Those are the ones you should be watching the closest. He warns that a nice guy, someone who takes everyone at face value, is basically walking through life with his eyes closed. You're not being kind, you're being careless. And in Machiavelli's world, carelessness doesn't just cost you an opportunity, it costs you everything.
So, what does he suggest? Watch behavior, not words. Words are cheap. Machiavelli makes this painfully clear. People will tell you exactly what you want to hear if it serves their purpose. They'll praise you, flatter you, make you feel like you're the most important person in the room. But none of that means anything unless their actions back it up. And most of the time, they don't. He also points out something subtle but incredibly powerful. People reveal themselves in small moments, not in grand gestures. It's how someone treats a waiter, how they react when you get a win and they don't, how they behave when they think no one important is watching. That's the real person. That's what's underneath the mask.
And here's where a lot of people mess up. They see the mask and they choose to ignore it because the truth is uncomfortable, because it's easier to believe the performance than to confront what's really going on. Machiavelli argues that this is weakness disguised as trust. Real trust? It's earned through patterns, through consistency, through watching someone over time and seeing if the mask ever slips. He doesn't say you should become paranoid. That's not the point. Paranoia makes you just as blind as naivety, just in the opposite direction. What Machiavelli advocates for is something much sharper. Awareness, observation, the ability to sit across from someone, smile back at them, and still keep a part of your mind asking, what do they actually want from this? And that's not cynicism, that's intelligence. See, the nice guy hears all this and thinks it sounds exhausting. He thinks, why can't people just be honest? And sure, that'd be great. But Machiavelli would say, that's not the world you live in. You live in a world where people wear masks every single day, and your only real choice is whether you learn to read them or keep getting played by them. The masks aren't going away. People aren't going to suddenly stop performing. So the question isn't whether they're wearing one. They are. The question is, can you see through it? Machiavelli says you'd better learn to, fast. Here's something most people don't want to hear. Being nice doesn't protect you. It exposes you. And Machiavelli, he saw this centuries ago. He watched men bend over backwards to please everyone around them, agreeing when they should have pushed back, smiling when they should have drawn a line. And what did those men get in return? They got walked over, used, discarded the moment they were no longer convenient. Machiavelli argues that niceness, when it becomes your entire identity, it's not a virtue, it's a vulnerability. Because the world doesn't reward people for being agreeable, it rewards people for being valuable, and there's a massive difference between the two. Think about it. The nice guy says yes to everything. He avoids conflict like it's a disease. He puts everyone else's needs ahead of his own, not because he's generous, but because he's terrified of disapproval. And Machiavelli sees right through that. He points out that this kind of behavior isn't kindness. It's weakness wearing a mask. It's a strategy, just a really bad one. And the worst part, people can sense it. They know when someone's being agreeable just to be liked. And instead of respecting that person more, they respect them less. Because compliance doesn't earn respect, it earns contempt. Now, Machiavelli doesn't say you should be cruel. That's the part people always get wrong. They hear his name and think, oh, so I should just be a terrible person. No, that's not what he's saying. What he argues is that you need to be strategic, intentional. You need to understand that every interaction has a power dynamic, and if you're not aware of it, you're losing it.
A strategic man knows when to be generous, but he also knows when to say no. He knows when to extend trust and when to hold back. He doesn't give everything away up front, hoping people will appreciate it, because Machiavelli warns they won't. People take what's freely given and then ask for more. That's not cynicism, that's observation.
See, the nice guy operates on a fantasy. He believes that if he just keeps giving, keeps accommodating, keeps sacrificing, eventually people will recognize his value. Eventually they'll return the favor. But Machiavelli demolishes that idea. He says men are ungrateful, fickle, and driven by self-interest. Not all the time, not every single person, but enough of them that you'd be a fool to build your entire life strategy around the hope that people will treat you fairly just because you treated them well. And that's the brutal truth. The nice guy doesn't get the promotion, he gets more work. The nice guy doesn't get the loyalty, he gets taken for granted. The nice guy doesn't get respected, he gets tolerated. There's a big difference. A strategic man, on the other hand, he earns respect because he has standards, boundaries. He's not rude, he's not heartless, but he's clear about what he will and won't accept. And people, they respond to that, not because they fear him, but because they understand he values himself enough to not be pushed around. Machiavelli's point is simple but sharp. Stop performing kindness to win approval. Start being deliberate about how you move, how you give, and who you give to. Niceness without strategy is just self-destruction in slow motion. So no, this isn't about becoming some cold, calculating villain. It's about waking up. It's about realizing that the game is already being played, whether you like it or not. And Machiavelli's argument is clear. You can either play it with your eyes open, or get played with a smile on your face. Most people think being merciful makes them a good person. And on the surface, yeah, it sounds right. You forgive, you let things slide, you give people second chances, third chances, fourth chances, and you tell yourself you're being the bigger person. But Machiavelli, he looks at that and says, no, that's not mercy. That's weakness wearing a mask. See, Machiavelli argues that mercy only means something when it comes from a position of strength. When you have the power to punish and you choose not to, that's mercy. But when you don't have the power to do anything about it and you just let people walk all over you, that's not mercy. That's surrender. You're not being kind. You're being helpless, and you're calling it a virtue so you can sleep at night. And that's the part most people don't want to hear. He makes this distinction very clearly. A leader, or anyone in a position of authority, who is merciful without being feared first, is setting themselves up to be destroyed. Because people don't respect mercy that comes from weakness. They exploit it. They see it as an invitation. Think about it. The person at work who never pushes back, who always says yes, who forgives every missed deadline, every broken promise. Are they respected, or are they just convenient? Machiavelli would say they're a doormat, and the worst part, everyone around them knows it, except them. He points out that rulers who tried to be merciful above all else often ended up causing more harm than those who were willing to be harsh when it mattered. Why? Because their mercy created chaos. It emboldened bad actors. It made the environment unstable for everyone, including the people they were trying to project. So the cruelty of a few decisive punishments, Machiavelli argues that's actually more merciful in the long run than letting disorder spread because you were too afraid to act. And that's the brutal part. He's not saying be cruel for the sake of it. He's saying, don't confuse your fear of confrontation with compassion. They are not the same thing. A lot of nice guys fall into this trap. They avoid conflict. They avoid hard conversations. They let people disrespect them, cross their boundaries,
take advantage of their time and energy, and they label all of that as being a good person. But Machiavelli warns, that's not goodness. That's cowardice dressed up in moral language. Real mercy requires teeth. It requires the ability to say no, the willingness to walk away, the backbone to enforce consequences. And then, only then, when you choose to show grace, it actually means something. It carries weight. People respect it because they know you didn't have to give it. He warns that the world doesn't reward people for being soft. It rewards people who are strong enough to be soft on their own terms. There's a massive difference between the two. So the next time you find yourself being the bigger person, ask yourself a hard question. Are you actually being merciful? Or are you just scared of what happens if you stand your ground? Because Machiavelli's message here isn't about becoming heartless, it's about becoming honest. Honest with yourself about why you keep letting things go. Honest about whether your mercy is a choice or a default. And if it's a default, that's not virtue, that's a survival mechanism, and it's one that sooner or later will cost you everything.
All right, this is the one that makes people really squirm, because when Machiavelli talks about deception, most people immediately jump to, so he's saying lie to everyone. No, that's a lazy reading, and it misses the entire point. What Machiavelli actually argues is this: the world is not honest, people are not honest, and if you walk through life assuming everyone is telling you the truth, showing you their real intentions, playing fair, you're going to get eaten alive.
That's not pessimism, that's observation. He'd seen it, he'd lived it. He watched leaders get destroyed, not because they lacked talent, but because they were too transparent with the wrong people. So here's what he says. He says a wise person doesn't reveal everything, not because they're dishonest by nature, but because full transparency in a world full of hidden agendas is just stupid. His word, not mine. Well, his sentiment, at least.
Machiavelli points out that there's a difference between lying and strategic concealment, and that distinction matters. He's not telling you to fabricate stories or betray people who trust you. What he is saying is you don't hand people your entire playbook. You don't show your cards before the hand is played. You control what others know about your intentions, and you do it deliberately. And this is where nice guys really struggle, because they've been taught that openness is a virtue, that you should always say what you mean, wear your heart on your sleeve, be an open book. And Machiavelli would look at that and say, that's a beautiful way to lose everything. He warns that when you are completely transparent, you give other people the power to outmaneuver you. You're handing them the map to your weaknesses, your fears, your pressure points. And not everyone who receives that information is going to handle it with care. Some will use it quietly, strategically, against you. Now, does that mean you should trust no one? Machiavelli doesn't go that far, but he does argue that trust should be earned, slowly, and even then, he says, keep something in reserve.
Because loyalty, in his experience, is conditional. People are loyal when it benefits them, and the moment the math changes, so does the loyalty. Cold? Maybe, but honest. He also makes a really sharp observation about appearances. Machiavelli argues that what people perceive is more important than what's actually true. He says you don't always need to be virtuous, but you absolutely need to appear virtuous. Because people judge on the surface. They respond to what they see, not what's underneath. And a smart person understands this. They manage perception. They curate what the world sees. And before you say, that's manipulative, Machiavelli would ask you a simple question. Does every person you interact with see the real you? Do you act the same way in a job interview as you do with your closest friend? Do you speak the same way to your boss as you do to your sibling? No, you don't. You adjust, you present, you manage how you're seen. You're already doing what Machiavelli describes. You just don't want to admit it. That's the genius of what he's saying. He's not inventing some dark art. He's naming something that already exists, something everyone already does, but only a few do intentionally. The nice guy does it accidentally and calls it being polite. The strategic person does it on purpose and calls it survival. Machiavelli just had the nerve to write it down.
Let's get something straight. Machiavelli doesn't care about your intentions, and he argues, neither does the world. You can have the best heart, the purest motives, the most noble reasons for doing something. But if you fail, nobody remembers your intentions. They remember the failure. That's it. That's all you get.
And this is where Machiavelli draws a hard line between how we wish the world worked and how it actually works. He argues that people judge you by outcomes, period. Not by what you meant to do, not by how hard you tried, not by how good your plan sounded on paper, by what actually happened, by what you delivered. He points out that history is written by winners, not by people who almost got there, not by the ones who had great ideas but couldn't execute. The world doesn't hand out trophies for effort. It never has. And Machiavelli says if you're operating under the belief that being well-intentioned is enough to earn respect, influence, or power, you're already losing. And this hits the nice guy especially hard, because the nice guy lives in a world of intentions. I meant well. I was trying to help. I had good reasons. Machiavelli looks at all of that and says, so what? What did you actually accomplish? What changed because of you? What did you build? What did you protect? See, he warns that there's a dangerous comfort in good intentions. It becomes a shield, an excuse. People hide behind it. They say, well, at least I did the right thing, while everything around them crumbles.
And Machiavelli argues doing the right thing that leads to ruin isn't really the right thing at all. That's a brutal reframe, but sit with it for a second. He uses the example of rulers who were generous, kind, and morally upright and got overthrown, destroyed, or to their people. So who actually did more good? The one with the clean conscience and the collapsed kingdom? Or the one with dirty hands and a thriving state?
That's the question Machiavelli forces you to sit with. And it's uncomfortable, because we've been taught our whole lives that intentions matter most, that being a good person is about what you mean, not what you do. But Machiavelli flips that completely. He argues that being effective is being good, that results are the only moral currency that actually counts in the real world. Now, does that mean you should throw ethics out the window? No, that's not what he's saying. But he is saying, stop using your good heart as a substitute for competence. Stop expecting the world to reward you just because you tried hard. Stop thinking that meaning well protects you from consequences. It doesn't. He warns that the graveyard of history is filled with well-meaning people who refuse to adapt, who clung to their principles so tightly that they couldn't function in reality. And reality, Machiavelli argues, is the only arena that matters, not the world in your head, not the world you wish existed, the one that's actually in front of you. So, what's the takeaway here? He's not telling you to abandon your values. He's telling you to pair them with execution, with strategy, with an obsession for outcomes. Because at the end of the day, nobody's going to ask what you intended. They're going to look at what you built, what you changed, what you left behind. And that's either something or it's nothing. This one's gonna hurt, but it needs to be said.
Machiavelli makes a claim that most people refuse to accept, not because it's wrong, but because it's too honest. He says that human beings, at their core, are ungrateful, fickle, and deceitful. They'll love you when you're useful and forget you the moment you're not. Harsh? Absolutely. But he wasn't writing poetry. He was writing from experience. He watched allies turn into enemies overnight. He saw people swear loyalty on Monday and betray by Friday. He observed how quickly gratitude evaporates when self-interest walks into the room. And he didn't flinch from it. He documented it. And here's the thing, the nice guy never wants to hear. Machiavelli argues that this isn't the exception, it's the rule. Most people aren't plotting against you. They're not villains, they're just human. And humans are wired to prioritize themselves, their survival, their comfort, their advantage. You do someone a massive favor. You sacrifice your time, your energy, maybe even your money, and you expect what? Loyalty? Gratitude? Some kind of unspoken bond? Machiavelli warns, don't count on it. Not because everyone is evil, but because people have short memories and long lists of needs. The favor you did last month, it's already fading. The sacrifice you made last year, gone. What have you done for them lately? That's what matters. That's how people operate, whether they admit it or not. And the fickle part, he saw it up close. The same crowd that cheered a leader one day would call for his head the next. Public opinion shifts like wind. People don't commit to you. They commit to what you provide. The moment someone offers more, they move on. No guilt, no ceremony, just gone. The nice guy takes this personally. He gets burned once, twice, 10 times, and every single time he's shocked. How could they do this to me after everything I did for them? And he spirals. He gets bitter. Or worse, he doubles down, tries to be even nicer, thinking that more kindness will somehow fix human nature. Machiavelli would call that foolish, not because kindness is bad, but because expecting people to change their nature based on your generosity, that's a losing game. He points out that the wise leader doesn't hate people for being this way. He just accounts for it. He builds his plans knowing that loyalty is conditional, knowing that today's ally might be tomorrow's problem, knowing that trust should be given carefully, slowly, and never completely. That's not paranoia, that's awareness. And the deceit part, Machiavelli doesn't sugarcoat it. He argues that people will lie to your face if it serves them. They'll smile while they're undermining you. They'll promise things they never intend to deliver. Not all people, sure, but enough to make you careful. So what do you do with this? Become cold? Become cynical? Lock everyone out? No, Machiavelli's point isn't to make you bitter. It's to make you sharp. It's to strip away the fantasy that everyone around you is operating with the same good intentions you are. Some are, many aren't. And the ones who refuse to see that, they're the easiest targets. The nice guy trusts by default. Machiavelli says trust should be earned, and even then, verified. It's not about being cruel, it's about refusing to be a fool. And in a world full of people looking out for themselves, he argues that the least you can do is look out for yourself, too. Here's a question most people never ask themselves. Can you change who you are when the situation demands it? Not who you want to be, not who you're comfortable being, but who you need to be, right now, in this moment, with everything on the line. Machiavelli argues that this ability to shift, to adapt, to become what the moment requires, is the single most important quality a person can have. And he also says most people are completely incapable of it. That's the problem. He points out that human beings are creatures of habit. We find a way that works, and we stick to it. If being cautious got us through one crisis, we stay cautious forever. If being aggressive won us something once, we keep swinging. We lock into a pattern, and we ride it until it kills us. And Machiavelli says it will kill you, eventually.
Because here's what he understood about the world that most people don't. The world doesn't stay the same. Circumstances change constantly. What worked yesterday might be the exact thing that destroys you tomorrow. The cautious man succeeds in times that call for patience, but when the moment demands boldness, he hesitates, and he loses everything. Machiavelli uses this concept of fortune. He talks about it like a river. When the weather's calm, nobody thinks about floods. Nobody builds defenses. And then the storm comes, and it washes everything away. He argues that the people who survive aren't the ones who got lucky. They're the ones who prepared, the ones who saw the river for what it was, unpredictable, violent, indifferent, and built their walls before the rain started. But here's the deeper point. It's not just about preparation. Machiavelli warns that even prepared people fail if they can't change their approach. You can have all the resources in the world, all the knowledge, all the experience, but if you're rigid, if you can only operate one way, fortune will eventually find your blind spot, and it won't be gentle about it. He gives examples throughout The Prince of leaders who were wildly successful until they weren't, not because they lost their skills, not because they got lazy, but because the times changed and they didn't change with them. They kept doing what made them great in one era, and it made them obsolete in the next. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because Machiavelli is essentially saying your personality, your values, even your instincts, they can become liabilities. The thing that defines you can be the thing that defeats you if you can't put it aside when the moment calls for something different. That's a hard pill. Most people build their entire identity around being a certain type of person. I'm honest, I'm careful, I'm bold, I'm loyal, and those are fine qualities. But Machiavelli would ask, are you those things because they serve you, or because you're too afraid to be anything else? He argues that the truly effective person isn't locked into one identity. They read the room, they read the moment, and they become whatever that moment needs them to be. Not fake, not manipulative for the sake of it, but fluid, strategic, alive to the reality in front of them instead of clinging to some comfortable version of themselves. Most people won't do this. Machiavelli knew that. He says it plainly. A man who is cautious by nature cannot suddenly become bold, and that's why fortune ruins him. Adaptability isn't optional, it's survival. And the ones who refuse to bend, Machiavelli says they break every single time. This one cuts deep, and it's one of Machiavelli's most famous ideas for a reason. He talks about what he calls unarmed prophets, and the concept is brutally simple. An unarmed prophet is someone who has the vision, the ideas, the moral high ground, but absolutely no power to back any of it up. They believe that being right is enough, that the truth will win, that people will follow them just because their cause is just. Machiavelli says they get crushed every time. He points to history to prove it. He looks at figures like Savonarola, a monk in Florence who had the people on his side, who preached reform, who genuinely believed he was doing the right thing. And for a while it worked. People listened, they followed. But the moment the tide turned, the moment powerful people pushed back, Savonarola had nothing. No army, no leverage, no force, just words. And words without power, Machiavelli argues, they're just noise. Savonarola was executed, burned at the stake.
not because he was wrong, but because he had no way to protect what he built. And then Machiavelli contrasts that with someone like Moses, a man who also had a vision, also had a message. But Moses, he came with force. He came with the ability to act, to enforce, to defend his position. That's the difference. Machiavelli argues that Moses succeeded not because his cause was more righteous, but because he had the means to see it through. Now, why does this matter for someone who's stuck being the nice guy? Because this is exactly the trap nice guys fall into. They think having good intentions is enough. They think that if they're fair, if they're honest, if they play by the rules, the world will reward them for it. And Machiavelli will look at that and say, that's an unarmed prophet, someone standing in the middle of a battlefield holding nothing but their principles. He warns that ideas without enforcement are just wishes. You can have the best plan in the room, the smartest strategy, the clearest vision, but if you don't have the influence, the leverage, the positioning to make it real, someone else will take it from you, or worse, they'll take credit for it. And here's what makes this so painful. Machiavelli points out that unarmed prophets often start strong. People rally around them. There's momentum, there's excitement, but it never lasts. Because the moment opposition shows up, real opposition, with teeth, the unarmed prophet has nothing to fight with, and the people who once followed them, they disappear, just like that. He's not saying you need to be violent. That's a lazy reading of Machiavelli. What he's really saying is you need teeth. You need something behind your words that makes people take you seriously. That could be resources, relationships, skills, leverage, something, anything. But you cannot walk into the arena empty-handed and expect your good heart to protect you. It won't. Machiavelli argues that the world doesn't reward the righteous, it rewards the prepared. And there's a massive difference between those two things. One is a feeling, the other is a strategy. So the nice guy sits there, wondering why nobody listens to him, why his ideas get stolen, why he keeps getting passed over. And Machiavelli already answered that question centuries ago. You were an unarmed prophet. You walked in with a message, but no muscle. And the world did what it always does to people like that. It moved on without you. So, what does Machiavelli's ideal leader actually look like? Because it's not what most people think. When people hear the prince, they picture some tyrant sitting on a throne, manipulating everyone around him. Cold, ruthless, heartless. But that's a lazy reading. Machiavelli's ideal prince isn't a monster. He's something far more dangerous. He's adaptable. See, Machiavelli argues that the perfect leader isn't locked into one way of being. He's not always kind. He's not always tough. He shifts. He reads the room, reads the moment, and becomes whatever that moment demands. And that's what makes him effective. Not brute force, not charm, flexibility. He warns that the man who insists on being good in every situation will inevitably be destroyed by those who are not good. Read that again. It's not a suggestion, it's a warning. The world doesn't care about your moral consistency. It cares about results. And Machiavelli's prince understands that deeply. But here's where it gets interesting. The ideal prince, according to Machiavelli, isn't just reacting to the world, he's shaping it. He's not sitting around waiting for things to happen. He's positioning himself, preparing, building alliances before he needs them, strengthening himself during peacetime so he's ready when chaos hits. Because Machiavelli makes it very clear, chaos always hits, always. And that preparation, it's not just military or political, it's personal. Machiavelli argues that the ideal prince masters himself first.
his emotions, his impulses, his ego. Because a man who can't control himself has no business trying to control anything else. The prince doesn't act out of anger. He doesn't make decisions out of fear. He moves with calculation, with purpose, every action serving a larger goal. Now, does that sound exhausting? Maybe. But Machiavelli points out something most people miss. The men who refuse to think this way, they're not free. They're just unaware. They're still being moved around by other people's agendas, by circumstances, by their own unchecked emotions. The only difference is they don't realize it. The ideal prince also understands reputation. Machiavelli argues that how people perceive you matters just as much as who you actually are, maybe even more. So the prince is deliberate about his image. He doesn't leave it to chance. He doesn't say, well, people should just see me for who I really am. No, he understands that perception is a tool, and like any tool, you either use it or someone uses it against you. He also stresses self-reliance. Machiavelli's prince doesn't build his power on borrowed strength, not on mercenaries, not on the goodwill of people who could turn on him tomorrow. He builds on his own foundation, his own skills, his own judgment, because anything given to you can be taken from you, but what you've built yourself, that's yours. And maybe the most overlooked part, Machiavelli's ideal prince knows when to be generous and when to hold back. He doesn't throw resources around trying to impress people. He's measured, strategic. He gives when it serves a purpose. He withholds when giving would make him look weak or desperate. It's not greed, it's intelligence. So here's the real takeaway.
Machiavelli's ideal prince isn't about domination. It's about mastery. Mastery of self, mastery of perception, mastery of timing. It's about being the kind of person who doesn't just survive the game, but sets the rules of it. And the gap between that man and the nice guy who just wants everyone to like him, it's not a gap, it's a canyon.